This is Brevard Watch, the news experience focused exclusively on Florida's Space Coast. I'm Matt Reed. Today's program is brought to you by Community Credit Union, a strong supporter of Brevard Public Schools. Coming up, why Education Secretary Betsy DeVos ought to visit some schools on the Space Coast, and why Florida Tech in Melbourne ranks near the top of a surprising new measure. Also this hour, a one-on-one interview with the mayor of West Melbourne, Hal Rose. But first, let's meet today's guests on Brevard Watch. Tina Lange is President and Chief Strategist at Strategic Inc. Public Relations. She's done work for Space Florida and Port Canaveral. And Isadora Rangel is Public Affairs Editor and columnist at Florida Today. It's a new job for her, having previously served as a political and legislative columnist for Treasure Coast newspapers. Our guests' opinions are their own and not necessarily those of Brevard Public Schools or BPS TV, but we are glad to have them in the studio. Thank you for joining us, Tina and Isadora. Another story that's been in the news is how Brevard Public Schools has accelerated spending on security measures at schools across the Space Coast. There was a plan over 3 or 4 years as part of the sales surtax that voters passed to improve security, but the Independent Oversight Committee and others decided that there really wasn't any way to prioritize one kid's safety over another. And the school board voted to accelerate the spending, getting all the schools done by spring break of 2018. Some people think that's a good idea. Some local conservatives and others think that that was not a good use of money, or they just, why the haters on this? Anybody? Isadora?
I don't get the haters. Unfortunately, it's a scary world we live in, and I wish we didn't have to do these security measures. But what if something happens? How will the school district explain itself and say, you know, we could have done something and we didn't? And I don't have kids, but if I had kids, I think I would like the enhanced security. It's a sad thing to think that now we have to pretty much lock kids in and have all these security measures that you would see probably in other facilities, but you know, I think it's better to be safe than sorry. We've seen so many shootings at schools, and you know, I think precaution is best.
Tina, you're a mom. You've got students in Brevard Public Schools. How does this effort go over with you?
I can't imagine a better way to spend those funds. You know, just to have, as a parent, to have additional peace of mind. I know they were talking about having kind of a single entrance area for each school to help with the security there. And, you know, with everything that is going on out there in the world today, and there's been crazies around here too, going to the schools, and they've locked them down in the middle of the day. So I personally think that they can't do it fast enough, and I can't imagine a better way to spend those funds.
A little bit different story that I've heard from the kind of the everyday stakeholders, the parents versus people whose primary relationship with the school district is their checkbook. But
Sure.
That's also a really important relationship, those people that are out there. Public trust is a major issue for the schools and really any government. I mean, what, in the process of spending all these millions of dollars of sales surtax, do you think people are judging the school district on? Do you have a sense of that, Isadora?
I think people are certainly watching, and I really don't get the argument of, like you said, people whose whole relationship is through their checkbook. I take a more holistic approach, which is, you know, education is not about my kid or her kid or somebody else's kid. When we have good education, it improves the quality of life of the entire community. But yes, just I think Brevard pays a lot of attention to how their tax dollars are spent, and we have a lot of people who think that government should do less and not more. So I would expect a lot of scrutiny from various people.
Tina, you've been doing public relations in Brevard County for a number of years. Everywhere you go, you hear people say, this is a red county. This is a conservative county. What does that mean to you from your point of view?
I think it goes back to that scrutiny of the dollars and how they're spent. And so, you know, regardless of what side of the fence you're on, I just think it's really important for the community, maybe through the local media, to be as well educated as they can be about where those dollars are going, the different types of things that are up for debate in terms of how to spend those dollars, and just become as active as possible. I don't think it matters what side you're on. A lot of us have very similar interests, especially when it comes to children, for example. I think anybody can understand the importance of that. So public education through the press, I think, is really important on that one.
Do you think it's mainly a fiscal thing? I mean, it seems like I haven't encountered in Brevard County just the dislike for government that you hear about sometimes. For me, it seems more like there's a culture here of people who have been civil servants. They've worked for the space industry. They've worked for military or defense contractors, maybe even healthcare. And they just don't like bureaucracy or waste. And they just want to know that if they give you $1, you're going to spend that dollar on what you said you were going to spend it on.
Right, I agree.
It's been the strangest thing to go out to town hall meetings and say, we spent even more of your sales tax money on even more schools. And they go, yes, yes, that's exactly what we wanted. Let's move on to another topic here. Brevard County Commissioners and some cities, not just to put this on county commissioners, but they were the most high-profile government group to enact a moratorium on the permitting and placement of medical marijuana dispensaries in Brevard County. The legislatures, I guess, gave them a narrow range of options. They could either put them everywhere that you might put a CVS or Walgreens, or not do them at all. What do you make of this, Isadora?
Yeah, I actually did a column, which you can read at floridatoday.com. I think I understand the moratorium, and just to backtrack a little bit, give a little bit of background, the legislature, through a very contentious legislative session, passed a bill. Like you said, it gives local governments two choices. First, you outright ban all medical marijuana dispensaries, or you allow them in the same zoning category as pharmacies.
Okay.
Many communities, like Brevard, don't have a specific zoning for pharmacies. It falls under a general commercial zoning category. So I understand the moratorium. Yes, okay, let's give it pause. Let's take a deep breath, see what we're going to do. My issue, and I explained in my column, is how it happened. Up until last month, the commission was poised to just allow dispensaries under this general zoning category. And then one of the commissioners, John Tabaya, comes out with a map that shows that Commissioner Kurt Smith's house could be 122 feet from a dispensary, and Commissioner Pritchett's church could be right next door to a dispensary. Out of a sudden, it's like, oops, not in my backyard. Let's take a pause here. Let's get a moratorium. And I think it plays into a lot of the misconceptions about what these dispensaries look like. First, these are not bong shops blaring Bob Marley music. These are very clinical places that are supposed to look and feel like a doctor's office. There are very strict regulations on advertisement. So this will not be a drug-ridden place. So I think there's still a lot of fear-mongering when it comes to that. But I do understand the moratorium. Local governments should have the choice to say what kind of zoning they want.
Tina, again, from a communication standpoint with the public, 70% of Floridians, including about that many Brevard County residents, voted in favor of medical marijuana. How do you square what we're seeing with the pace of government allowing these dispensaries to go in with what people seem to say they wanted?
I think that people have spoken. We've got a process. There were votes. It was overwhelming. I think just getting back to what's the benefit of having these facilities in our community? There's a benefit there. There's a medical benefit, and there's proven results. So I think we need to get back to that. Of course, people are going to worry. Some folks are going to worry. It's going to cause this in our community. It might make it, might bring down the community in some way. But there are many states that are doing this very well and successfully. And I think it's important that everybody, do their research and understand all of the benefits that come with this and stop worrying about the change. And you have to embrace it. The voters have asked for it.
One of the things that you hear in discussions of zoning in particular is that you don't want this to be within 500 feet of a church or a school.
Yeah, the state
Is
law
that
says
a relevant standard in 2017? I would like to hear both your takes on
Well,
this.
actually, the state law says that it can be just like a pharmacy, but not within 500 feet of a private or public school. Doesn't say anything about churches. Listen, I think medical marijuana is a new thing. I think obviously voters have spoken their mind, and I understand the fear, especially in a older community such as Brevard. It's sometimes progress can be a little slower than we hoped, but I just hope that the fear-mongering and the misconceptions don't get in the way of good policy. The other thing is, you're elected to carry the will of voters. although you can have your own ideologies and ideas about certain issues, you're still representing the people in all your own interests.
Tina, you are from the Denver area where they've legalized full-blown recreational use of marijuana. Have you been back to Colorado and seen a major difference in how things look or feel?
You know, I wasn't there for the beginning. I'm sure that there's some novelty to it at the very beginning when it's introduced into a community, and so you're going to get more proliferation of people going and trying this. But from what I've seen there, it's become kind of normal day-to-day business. I've even spoken with some of those business owners, and business is great for them. And you go into one of these dispensaries, and it's very clean. It does feel very clinical and professional. The people there are very professional. So, you know, again, I think if people did their research and saw how some of these other communities are handling it, maybe they would be less fearful of what was going to happen. And as far as, you know, the zoning piece of it goes, I just personally see it as like a liquor store. You don't want a liquor store next door to a school either. I think there should be some rules and regulations as to how far away it can be from a school, but you know, I really see it right on par with like an ABC Liquors or that type of thing.
Yeah, I don't see any problem with maintaining standards that are, I mean, you don't want to, if you really want to get people upset and make them against something, violate or try to tear down the norms that they already have. You know, introducing something new is hard enough. Making them give up something that they hold dear is very, very difficult. All right, when we come back, Education Secretary Betsy DeVos is visiting schools in Florida, but not the kind that our kids are most likely to attend. We have space news coming out of Cocoa. And the Florida Today building in Suntree is for sale. What do our guests think ought to go in there someday? I'm going to put them on the spot right after this.
Take the BPS CCU High School Mascot debit card anywhere, anyplace. Show your school spirit every time you use your card. Get your favorite BPS CCU High School Mascot debit card today by visiting any CCU branch. Learn more at ccuflorida.org/spirit.
Andy, thanks for joining us here in the studio. You recently hosted a town hall meeting at Bayside High School. About 100 people showed up from different walks of life. What were a couple of your takeaways from that?
Well, the first thing is that I was really happy to see the cross-section of the community there, including community leaders and some faith-based leaders. I was very impressed to have Representative Randy Fine there. First time I think we've ever had a state representative show up. Plus we had City Council from Palm Bay and West Melbourne and the faith-based leaders. I think they were all very interested in what Dr. Blackburn had to say, and clearly they had a lot to ask. Wide range of different questions, and Dr. Blackburn did a great job answering the questions.
As a school board member, listening to some of those questions, what were some of the issues that came up that made you think, okay, these are the things that we're going to need to prepare for and work on in the coming months?
Well, there was some issues brought up about you know, basically social, emotional, about children who where parents needed some assistance getting through the kids. There were concerns about attendance boundaries. You know, one of our favorite topics.
You're in for it this year.
Yeah, I've done that a bunch of times. I don't enjoy that.
The hard one being
all.
the hardest, biggest one sounds like is Melbourne High School, which is bursting at the seams, way over capacity. And some of the students that have been going there might be going to Heritage, Palm Bay, and
correct.
Shifting around down
They're going to
that
have to
area.
shift around because it's incumbent upon us to balance out utilization at the different schools, and the schools are already built. And you know, unless we're going to control where the populations move to or where builders build, which we don't do, we have to react to the communities morphing and expanding. And we have to balance that out so all kids have equal opportunity, equal access to resources, and we don't strain one school over another. And you know what? They're all great. And I tell all the parents, I said, for every parent that might not want to go to another school, I could find 5 I couldn't drag out of there.
That's interesting. You know, that issue of attendance and crowded schools or not, or would you consider closing a school a few years ago, seemed to be right at the center of relationships with the cities in Brevard County. How would you characterize Brevard Public Schools' relationships today with West Melbourne, Palm Bay, I think Melbourne and some of the other local governments in your your area?
Well, the district's overall relationship is a lot better because I believe that they're sensing the desire by the district as a whole to be a partner of theirs, as opposed to just asking them to do for us. Personally, I've always had a good relationship with the elected officials and community people throughout Brevard County, and we go through some of those contentious times that impact a particular community. I have conversations, I make sure I have conversations with the leaders in those communities to make sure that they have input, because honestly, they're their schools too. Those schools
Right.
belong to the public, they belong to all the other elected officials in Brevard County, and they should be concerned and they should have input into what we do.
The people in those neighborhoods benefit from the professionalism, the economies of scale of being Brevard Public Schools. But you were just at Roy Allen Elementary School this morning, I think you mentioned.
Right.
People there think about their kids go to Roy Allen. That's their community. They're not necessarily thinking about the whole 70-mile-long district. And so it is important to have those schools be centers of their communities.
Absolutely, and interesting, Roy Allen's not in my district, but I try to not only nurture the relationships with all of the community leaders, but I also try to make sure that I get into as many schools as possible and nurture the relationships with those principals, because as we know from the superintendent summit we had, we made it very clear that we're here to serve those in the schools, and the only way I can really do that is if I'm connecting with them and I'm listening to them to find out what their concerns are.
One of the biggest decisions the school board made recently was to accelerate school security improvements with security fencing that creates a single point of access, remote locking doors, video cameras, at least one video camera per school. This could have happened over several years under the voter-approved sales surtax. Instead, doing some accounting and accelerating that so it's all done by spring break 2018. Parents I've heard from seem to like it, but there was some political complaining or blowback against that initially. What's going on there? How would you size that up?
Well, I think I'm not sure that there was really any political blowback other than some people that weren't agreeing with the definition of the entire scope of security. So while we individually may have opinions, we're not the security experts. We have to rely on our security department, the sheriff's department, law enforcement, and experts in the field to tell us what do we need to do to keep these kids safe. Of course, the internal fencing, the single point of entry makes a lot of sense because it keeps the general community from roaming the campus without knowledge of them being around. The video camera, which you mentioned, which is I've been championing for many years, a simple, inexpensive solution. Having a camera on the people at the front desk, the guests that come in, they could see themselves on a video screen behind the camera. All of a sudden, it de-escalates emotions because they realize, hey, smile, you're on
Right.
candid camera, and it keeps them in check. 99% of problems will start at the front desk. So we've actually, Jupiter Elementary, who's had that up for a while, said they've had a noticeable decrease in aggression at the front counter. Beautiful. That's all we want to accomplish. We want to make it a safe environment for everybody, including our clerks and our front office staff. The perimeter fencing, where the controversy comes in, helps keep people from wandering in from other sides of the campus, but it more so keeps students safe and on the inside. It helps reduce their danger of eloping running out into the street. We've got what we would refer to as runners. Kids that just decide, you know what, had enough, I'm out of here.
A woman said that at the town hall meeting last night, said her own child was one part Harry Houdini, one part Usain Bolt.
Yep, and he said, and that's what she said. And she said, well, you just look the other way, and poof, he's gone. And while I can understand there's some differences of opinion on the importance of a perimeter fencing, I'm positive that attitude would change immediately if a student ran off campus, ran in the street, and got hurt or worse, killed. I can't imagine anybody objecting to perimeter fencing.
Another headline for the school board, and I guess Brevard Public Schools, wasn't necessarily a formal decision, but Brevard Public Schools is suing its software contractor, Harris School Solutions, breach of contract, essentially. School board entered into a contract, I think has all in maybe about $5.5 million thus far, for enterprise software to run things like purchasing, payroll, finance. You were on the school board when the
Correct.
deal was made, only one on the school board,
The
still
only
on the
one
school
left.
board.
The only one left holding the bag.
and you've seen how this has progressed over the years. How has your outlook on this changed?
Well, the outlook, well, I've went through many phases of outlook along the way. Of course, up front, I was against it. I thought it was bad timing. I thought it was expensive. Turns out, actually, it's for ERP software. It was inexpensive. I was led to believe it was ready to go. I was excited because when I got on the board in 2008, and I said, green screen software. I mean, I was using this when I graduated FIT in 1983 and went to work for Harris, and you're using it today in 2008.
It's like playing Pong.
It is. I was
beeps
really
like Pong.
shocked. So I was reluctant, but I was convinced, hey, if we don't do it, it's going to be more expensive. We need to do it now because we need to implement it before the beginning of the fiscal school year. And then things just weren't progressing. Then all of a sudden, it looked like everything was going to fall apart, and Harris Software Corporation came in, and I was like, well, yeah, this is no small rinky-dink little company. These people know what they're doing, and I can't imagine that they bought a piece of software that didn't have promise. And so that renewed my faith in the decision that we made, and that we would hopefully become whole and have a functional piece of software, which was really my first interest, is because we need it. There are things that we're challenged to do, this data that we're not able to analyze because we just don't have the system in place to be able to do that. And then when that started to go south and realized it wasn't materializing, it was very depressing. Very depressing. Not that I could have changed anything necessarily at the beginning, but just because that's just not the way Brevard Public Schools operates. We're better than that. We're more thorough than that. And to let something like that happen, it's just, it's kind of a reality check in that we can always be doing a better job of analyzing the things that come before us. Now, suing them, we thought there was going to be a settlement. Things were looking up. It was leader of organization to leader of organization at one point in the discussions without the attorneys in the room, and then it fell apart.
And this is how business works. You got to resolve the situation, and if you have a contract, sometimes you got to go to court to figure it out.
So now our last effort, the last option to hopefully be made whole, is to recover something. And unfortunately, the only thing that's going to resonate in this situation is a lawsuit.
Andy Ziegler, thank you for joining us. This is Brevard Watch. I'm Matt Reed. My guests today are Tina Lange, President and Chief Strategist of Strategic Inc., and Isadora Rangel, Public Affairs and Engagement Editor at Florida Today. We'll talk more with them about Brevard County issues in just a second, but first, let's take a look at a one-on-one interview that we just did with West Melbourne Mayor Hal Rose. What are some of the issues with Brevard Public Schools that you foresee needing to work out going forward?
Yeah, I am on one of the school's Meadow Lane's SACS committee, so I do hear a lot of those things. Meadow Lane is definitely overcrowded now, and the boundaries are not just our city. A lot of them come from Palm Bay, and they need to change some of these boundaries. When they start lunches at 10:15 in the morning, that's a problem.
Right.
And the traffic, of course, that goes along with it when they're busing kids in. That it should be a local school for local community. So we're hoping to see some of that in the next year, change some of the boundaries and help out. And so we're working on that. But I mean, the schools, the principals are doing a fantastic job. They're A-rated schools. The School of Science, of course, speaks on its own. It used to be #1 in the state, and they got a good population and a very engaged, as Meadow Lanes do, a very engaged parent population. So that's what you need to be successful.
Okay, Tina and Isadora, let's talk about some education news here. This is BPS TV after all. Education Secretary Betsy DeVos has sort of freaked people out a little bit because she's very into school choice. She's advocating for things that people fear, like vouchers. She's been to Florida to visit schools now several times, but each time she goes, she visits a place that is a charter school or a special lab school or a private school, and not everyday public schools. What is that? What kind of signal does that send to you? Let's start with Tina.
Sure. I have 2 kids in public school, and I'm very happy with it. There are some really innovative things happening in public schools right now, and I think it's important that, there gets some attention there. So, for example, I know that Brevard County, Brevard Public Schools and Brevard Cultural Alliance, for example, have a partnership where they have local artists that embed themselves in the classrooms and help kids to learn the more complex science and math and technology type concepts. And, this is a fairly innovative thing to plant these artists in the schools. And I think it's important that some of that story get told. And some of these, I know my kids have been in the gifted programs over on the beach side, and there are some really incredible teachers in those programs in the public school system that are really getting these kids to reach far beyond their what they think is their potential. So I do think it's important to take a look at the public school system. That's where a majority of the kids are.
Right. Isadora, what do you think?
Well, Betsy DeVos was Donald Trump's, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, the most controversial appointment. Remember, Vice President Pence had to be the tiebreaker in a vote to get her appointed, and that was, I believe, that was the first time that a vice president had to do that, to appoint someone. She's infamous for comments such as saying that historic Black colleges were pioneers of school choice. That didn't sit well with a lot of people. Last time she was here,
That was at, if I'm not mistaken, that was at Bethune-Cookman College in Daytona Beach, correct?
yes, she was there. Many students got up and turned their backs to her and just walked out. So, needless to say, she's been quite controversial. But you see that sort of trend of school choice and at times at the expense of public schools, also in the state legislature. And you know this better than I do, that they passed a bill to give charter schools $200 million, and now they're forcing school districts to share their capital funds with charter schools. So that's a trend that's not only happening at the federal level, but also at the state level of, Republicans who believe that government should be smaller and smaller and smaller and let these enterprises take over. I think that's a great debate, and I don't have all the answers. I think if I were a parent, yes, I would like my kids to go to a charter school, but then what happens to the other kids who are left behind? So,
I think the thing that stands out to me about this story is that from the perspective of an assistant superintendent in schools, and a new one at that, it has been striking to me how much desire and energy there is within the people in a school district to do that innovative teaching, to have project-based learning, to prepare better people and students for careers and technical and vocational things, to teach that STEM curriculum that people keep saying we need to teach. But if you want to stand up a lab to teach students advanced manufacturing, for example, in cocoa, you got to go get an appropriation and beg for it in Tallahassee. The money comes down with so many strings attached that it's hard to make a move. Here's Betsy DeVos advocating for these kinds of approaches to teaching, but right here in Florida, where she's coming to visit and tout those things, it's really hard to get the political support to do that. Isadora, politically, why is that? Is there a distrust in Tallahassee with the Republicans of?
I think so, and just to say, Betsy DeVos, before she was appointed, she was a big philanthropist, and I believe she ran, or she was very for school choice, and she was involved in pushing for that. With Republicans, I mean, and obviously they control the state legislature, is very interesting. They're very for local control and autonomy, but a lot of times you see all these mandates, like you said, from Tallahassee, and that doesn't really make a lot of sense,
And they're not all bad. They're
Yeah.
not all bad mandates. I mean, one of our state representatives, Coach P. Placentia from East Orange County, represents North Brevard, advocated for mandatory recess. Who can't
Yeah.
support that?
I was surprised to know that there was no mandatory recess. It's like, kids are not robots.
Right, and they're trying to scale back assessments and testing, but then, if you want to pay staff or teachers more, they'd prefer to do it with the categorical that they send to give them a bonus rather than letting your tax base grow and paying them raises. So it's kind of a control issue, it seems like.
Yeah.
Tina, I'm thinking of inviting Betsy DeVos to Brevard County and having her, taking on a little tour, showing her around.
Sure.
If we could have Betsy in town here, Any ideas on what we ought to do with her? What we should show her? Kinds of people we ought to introduce her to?
You know, I think we need to take her into some of the schools in the different areas of the county, show her all of the unique things that are happening in kind of those, not only the STEM, themed classes, but also the side work that's being done and the gifted classes and, extracurriculars, because there really is a lot of creativity and innovation going on. And for her to get in there and see that and talk to the kids and the parents and be part of it, I think would make a big impact on her.
One thing that I've noticed about Brevard County is that, like a lot of school districts, there are a tremendous amount of resources put into making sure that students don't fall behind from poverty, to make sure that they are proficient at reading and math. And then we also have, at the other end, our top 10% can go head-to-head with the top 10% in Shanghai, Singapore, Finland, anywhere in the world. They are that smart. It's that enormous population of people in the middle, the other 65%, that we just haven't done anything transformative with yet. And it seems like that's where Florida ought to be putting its effort a little bit. I think that maybe from the beginning, teaching students how to work, not just lining up in rows of desks and learn, but also how to mash up subject matter and do projects and that sort of thing. Seems like it might be a pretty good idea.
Yeah.
Let's move on to another subject. Now, our viewers might not know this about all of us, but at one point or another, we are all, at least, Isadora, you are a current Florida Today
Yes.
employee. I am a former Florida Today. In fact, you replaced me at
Yes.
Florida Today. Tina, you were in the communications and marketing department at Florida Today before striking out on your own. The Florida Today building, which I have to say is awesome, is for sale. What can you do with that place? It's in Suntree. It seems like a good location. Tina, what would you like to see put there?
You know what? I would love to see a small business incubator put in there. I think it's a really unique facility. There's warehouse space. There's the space where the press used to be, the pre-press and all that. And there's so much square footage in there and this kind of open concept plan that I think it would be great for a small business incubator.
Isadora?
I like that idea. I want to see a Whole Foods, I'm sorry. Or a Trader Joe's.
That would be good.
So
I'll
if
take
you're
that too.
watching, please come to Melbourne.
I am
Brevard.
down with a Trader Joe's there. I hadn't thought of that, but that's a good idea.
But here's the issue. It's an old building, and I don't know when it was built, but you have it's a mixed-use building. So you have the news press on one side, and you have offices and cubicles where we do our work every day. The issue is that's a little outdated, and I think that they're going to have an issue with that because it's a huge building, and as we know, companies are shrinking, fewer employees. I think whoever buys that building is going to have to do a lot of retrofitting. I really hope they do buy it because I work for the company, and apparently we'll get a really nice new office. I think the location will be in Viera.
Well, so much has changed in the media world
Yeah.
that you just don't need that kind of industrial space or that many people to do
And
the
in
do the
any
work.
industry, I wonder who needs a building that size. He is in Brevard County. I'm trying to stay optimistic. I'm not saying that they're not going to sell the building or anything, but I think it's going to be a challenge. The Miami Herald sold its building to a casino company that planned to build this. I don't know where that stands. I don't think that's going to come to fruition, at least anytime soon. But you see that trend. Our partners in Vero Beach at the Press Journal have done the same. They sold their building, which was also along US 1, and bought a smaller one in the downtown area. So it's kind of sad to see how much smaller we've become, but it's the reality.
Well, I love both those ideas. I like the incubator idea, and I always love a Trader Joe's. You can't have too many of those. Especially it's on the way home for me now. I can get some Sumatra coffee and maybe some $3 chuck if it's Friday night. But and listen, I don't have any control over this. I just have to say this, even as an assistant superintendent. I think if you were going to have a high school or some place that taught industry and that kind of collaborative, project-based teaching, you could put that in Florida Today. You have a combination of wide open space where people could learn, do classroom-type work, And you have that mega industrial space where you could teach people machining, you could teach people AC repair, that kind of thing. There's even an auto shop out on the back side of that
Oh, I
place
didn't know
with
that.
lifts where they repair
Yes.
the buildings. And as an incentive for somebody to be the principal of that school, I would urge them to restore some of the fantastic features that Al Newharth had installed in there, including the J.R. Ewing wet bar that had the automatic doors that opened up in the in the
Yes.
publisher's office. There was
I've
a
heard about that.
there was a billiards room. There were koi ponds, and I think there was even a racquetball court. In,
Yes.
We have a
Yes.
ping pong table. I think that's all that's left.
That is luxury in today's media world.
Yes, nobody actually plays. We're so busy writing the news that we don't have time to play. So,
All right, this
For
this
our readers to know.
honey, stop the car. This property is a hot one. Somebody better buy this one pretty soon. Okay, let's talk about space. Nobody's asking you to do the physics calculations behind this, but there were a couple of cool new headlines that show how deep down into the economy space is getting now. You have COCO changing some of its zoning to allow, I believe, rocket crafters to do engine testing, which is a big deal for Brevard County. And also at SpaceX, out at Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, they're doing much the same thing, but probably on a bigger scale. Good steps for the space economy. You two have different perspectives. Tina, you've been here for quite some time. Isadora, you're new to this place. Are we back? Is the space industry back? When you came to Brevard County, Isadora, did you find the depressed place that we all felt after the space shuttle layoffs, or does it seem more vibrant? What's your take?
no, well, I just moved here from Stewart, which is an hour and 15 minutes south. And, I'm not a space fanatic, so whenever I thought of space, I've thought of NASA and the shuttle program. When I got here and I heard about all these companies who are doing this amazing work, that was very refreshing. I look at space more as an economic driver, and I want more jobs, and I want more young people to move here, and more businesses to open, and restaurants, and bars, and gyms. So I think it benefits everyone to have, especially the type of skilled workforce that these companies attract. I think it's good for the region and increases our income levels. So I'm excited, and more young people.
Tina, your take?
Yeah, I think there's some really positive trend going on with these companies building facilities up at the Space Center. And I think the important thing is that we have diversification in our economy. So, for us to focus solely on aerospace, I think would be short-sighted, that we need to have a plethora of diversity going on and different sizes of companies, different types of industries. So while certainly space and aerospace is a huge economic driver for this county, I still would like to see, in order for us to get back to where we were and even better than that, to see some of these small and mid-sized businesses grow as well.
You were here during an era when the space program was the space shuttle program. There was a standing army of people out at Kennedy Space Center. There was triple redundancy.
Right.
You had somebody who would watch the wrench turner turn the bolt and put a stamp to make sure that they did that. And then you had another person that came around with a stamp to
For that
stamp that they
guy.
saw that guy watch the person turn the wrench. And it was inevitable that things were going to change in the space economy. Now, you also did public relations work off and on for Space Florida, for SpaceX. How is the space economy here different today than it was in, say, 2003?
Oh my gosh, so different. So you're right. At NASA in particular, there was a lot of redundancy in positions, and so that was a lot of employment. But you've got companies like SpaceX, for example, that have a very lean model. And so I think that's where we're headed. You don't have all that redundancy. The wages are good. The skills are high, but it's less jobs. So ultimately, you've got to find other places to put some of those jobs too.
Isadora, you talked about having the diversity of services and younger workers and others that come along with having a pretty vibrant economy. I think everybody's happy with that concept and having it. Did you notice a real difference between the people here versus, say, on the Treasure Coast or elsewhere?
Absolutely. Well, I think the main difference here is the types of industries you have here, and you have more industries. The Treasure Coast is known mostly as being a retirement community. Aside from the healthcare field and just law offices and smaller businesses, there are not a lot of jobs. You either drive to Palm Beach or you work in retail or the service industry in the area. Here you see the type of high-skilled jobs that attract, more educated, more affluent, and people with a lot more disposable income to spend, and that's really important. Yes, and I do see the difference just walking into a grocery store or a restaurant. You don't see as many early bird specials. That's true.
You don't. That's true. You don't. It's funny. My family would ask, "Well, what's it like there?" Because they're all from the West Coast. They don't get out here very often. I'd say, "Well, for Florida, it's very low key. I mean, you don't see the luxurious landscaping along the streets that you do other places. There isn't the Vegas type environment that you see around Daytona Beach or even around parts of Orlando, but the company can be good. That person in flip-flops next to you in line at Publix just might actually be a rocket scientist, and if you get to talking to them, you can learn some pretty interesting stuff. So let's hope that we have more people like that and some more characters too, like some of the entrepreneurs that are pushing the blue origins and the Space Force, and more gyms. And more educating, more cool education and that sort of thing too. All right, when we come back, Florida Tech is growing fast and ranks up there with some other interesting schools. Cocoa Beach is experimenting, or not Cocoa Beach, but we're getting some perhaps paid parking in Cocoa Beach at parks. We'll see whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. And what do our guests think should happen next? We're going to talk to them about that.
Take the BPS CCU High School Mascot Debit Card anywhere, anyplace. Show your school spirit every time you use your card. Get your favorite BPS CCU High School Mascot Debit Card today by visiting any CCU branch. Learn more at ccuflorida.org/spirit.
This is Brevard Watch. I'm Matt Reed. Our guests today are Isadora Rangel from Florida Today and Tina Lange, President and Chief Strategist at Strategic Inc. here in Brevard County. Let's talk about Florida Tech in Melbourne. This is the school that families don't always think of when they're applying to colleges, but they sure like to be that place, and it's grown a lot. It just made a list of among America's fastest growing universities, up there with some better known names like Carnegie Mellon University. Just off the tops of your head, what do you make of this place? Have you had a chance to go explore or have some experiences there? Tina, let's start with you.
Yeah, I've had a fair amount of involvement with the Women's Business Center at Florida Tech, and that's the primary way that I know of the university, but it's that center is funded in part by the SBA, and they've gotten a number of accolades just federally for their innovative programs and helping small and mid-sized business. So, when you've got a local university that's also taking those extra steps to help the economy and local businesses, I have to applaud them for that.
Isadora, again, you haven't been here for a long time, but does the place have a reputation or seem to fit in a way that you haven't seen elsewhere?
Yeah, I have a soft spot for the schools that are not UF or FSU. I went to Florida International in Miami, which has the highest percentage of Hispanic enrollment in the country. So I think these schools that are up and coming sometimes can be a great fit. I think there's huge hype around schools like UF and FSU when you're trying to get your kids in it. A lot of times it's what you make of it, and having a local school like that that's growing, I think that's really cool. And I've seen a lot of their international students out and about, and I think that's also, it brings a lot of diversity to the community.
I want to get both of your takes on something that has been a little bit of a change of direction at the university. The previous president, Anthony Catanese, was known and will tell you himself, he is a builder and a grower of campuses. He added sports, he added programs, he increased the percentage of women that go to this school, expanded online learning programs and professional programs for business, psychology, those sorts of things. There was a little bit of an economic shock that happened that set back the university. At about the same time, the new president, T. Dwayne McKay, came in and has decided to focus and concentrate more resources around what he calls the 5 pillars of excellence, or centers of excellence. And for Florida Tech, it is 1, hardware and software cybersecurity, 2, aerospace and space systems, 3, autism treatment and research. They have the Scott Center for Autism Research, really a world leader there. Human-centered design and manufacturing. And then also, number 5, ocean, lagoon, climate science, and engineering. What do you make of that? Tina?
I think it's awesome because you can see that those industries all reflect our community here. So the school is, doing its part to help the community as well as provide good, solid education. When they hire someone new on, it's going to be somebody that has different ideas, might come in with a different perspective. But these people are good at what they do for a reason. So I definitely would trust his take on that, and I think it's only going to help our community.
What do you think of that, Isadora?
I agree with everything she said, and the 5th pillar being the lagoon, I think it's a great opportunity, and it's being done at FAU at Harbor Branch. You have one of the most diverse estuaries in the world, so it makes sense to capitalize on that. There's a lot of uniqueness in the lagoon, so it makes sense to explore that and feeding into the local economy. Maybe FIT will not be UF or FSU in the next 10 years, but if you find a niche, a market, I guess, for the lack of a better word, I think it's very clever for them to be doing that. Not trying to be all things for everyone.
Right, and I think that the purpose of doing this is to really be world-class at some things. And that, a lot of other things follow from that. But in the meantime, what's missing from this list, right? They have a great business school. A lot of people participate in that. I'm a member and advisor of the Centers for Ethical Leadership there, the Nathan Bisk. No journalism, sadly, although it's not going away anytime soon. But you mentioned the We Venture. Any signs that that's flagging in any way?
It's doing really well. I mean, they are growing businesses by the dozens every year, helping them to get started, giving them resources. As an entrepreneur myself, it can be difficult when you're working in a silo, so to have a trusted local university helping with that is really wonderful, and it's brought together this network of business people that I don't think we would, as business owners, have access to otherwise. So I really think it's been a blessing.
Isadora, have you been any place in the United States, Florida, or around where you have really seen a success or a successful local economy that commercialized their discoveries from the university?
Oh.
Like Stanford, for example, is sort of the world famous, or Harvard is a little bit at that. I'm thinking about We Venture, for example, and I mean, the dream would be that you have women who come out of their engineering programs and you stand them up with an invention or something that they have patented.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen, I don't know, in Florida maybe not so much yet?
Not in Florida. Oh, that's a tough one. I'm sure there have been. Maybe the Ivy League schools do a better job at it, but I don't think any Florida schools are really specialized in one thing.
Right.
You have UF and FSU and all the other schools that offer many different degrees.
That's telling, though, because sometimes in journalism, it's what isn't there that is as much the story as what is.
Yeah. I think the challenge for most universities is we have an ever-changing jobs market. We have careers that are going to be hot in 10 years that today don't even exist. How do you keep up with that in terms of providing degrees and masters for people to get prepared for that? The traditional degrees probably are not going to cut 10, 15 years from now. At times I wonder, I should go back to school, but for what? What's going to be the career of the future? And I think universities and state colleges got to stay ahead of the game and always looking at what's going on in different industries.
Let me ask you this question. Right now, all the talk and news stories that you read is about more vocational training in schools. And I think that's wonderful. I mean, we absolutely want to do that more in Brevard Public Schools. But part of that narrative has been that college itself just isn't worth it anymore, that a bachelor's degree, it shouldn't be something that every family should be aspiring to. Is college getting a bad rap right now? Is a bachelor's degree overrated or maybe a little bit underrated right now? You got a gut feel for that? Tina?
I don't think you can survive without a degree now. And I think that the prices have gotten way out of hand, and we need to make education more affordable for everyone. But no, I can't imagine, especially in this high-tech economy, not having that type of experience and educational background. I don't know how you would succeed.
What do you think, Isadora?
Well, I grew up like knowing I was going to go to college, so I never thought about it until I was watching Marco Rubio during the presidential campaign talk about that and the lack of vocational training and the sort of hype around getting a bachelor's degree. And I think I see two different trends. One is a bachelor's degree is not enough. You got to get a master's, a PhD. And then you have this other trend, which is these trade jobs are still there and they still need people. When I found out how much an underwater welder makes, I was like, why did I go to journalism school? I could be making 6 figures. And I don't think everyone is cut out for college, and I think it's okay. And I think a lot of kids go into college because it's the right thing to do, and then they go, yeah, I'm not really good at passing exams, or I'm not very good at English 101. And maybe there are other careers. And I've heard from several business leaders that there is a lack of skilled workforce to work in manufacturing in all these new companies. So my advice to parents is keep an open mind.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that most of the people that I hear say not everybody should go to college are people that went to college. And when you go and you talk to the person at 7-Eleven at 6:30 in the morning who's buying their Monster Energy drink and their cigarettes and their lottery ticket on their way to work, and you ask them what they want for their kids, they want them to go to college. You know, they for many of us growing up, especially if your family was from Michigan like mine or Ohio or someplace, you know, only being able to work with your hands and not having that, some of those gatekeeper pieces of paper, so to speak, even if it was an associate's degree, that was a one-way ticket to the unemployment line. You want to be the person who designs the robot, or maybe builds the robot, not the person whose job gets taken by the robot. So,
but getting vocational training doesn't mean you have no education. You still gotta get
true.
You still gotta get trained. I mean, I think there were a lot more union jobs in the past that paid really well and had the great benefits. I think, especially in Florida, there are fewer of those. So if you can get into one of those jobs, just stay there. But I think it's not just getting a bachelor's degree. I think, and listen, I'm a millennial here, and I know everything that's wrong about my generation. One of them being like, oh, I just want to fulfill my dream. I want to get that history degree, because it's so fascinating. What I tell myself and my friends is like, be practical. If you're going to get a bachelor's degree, think of the career plan you want to follow.
True.
And a lot of times I wish I had done that, just go into college, not just, oh, I just want to live my dream, and just really think, okay, I'm spending $60,000 in this degree. When am I going to see that money again? Be a little more practical, kids.
Dreams are great.
Yeah.
But it should be a little less dreamy and a little bit more like what you sort of experienced already in an internship.
Yeah.
And you kind of want to get paid for it now.
Yeah, and
Yes.
listen, my parents told me, do what you love. And
Yeah.
they never said, okay, but you got to still make money and pay bills. So I'm not blaming it on my parents because they were great. But you got to be a little practical. And I don't think there's anything wrong with vocational degrees. I know a kid who works, he's a contractor for FP&L he's a lineman basically, making great money, and he really enjoys it. So keep an open mind.
Welding is my backup plan.
Awesome.
Just in case. You never know. I want a little trailer with welding stuff.
It's very dangerous.
I want to be able, and brazing, do a little brazing, help people. I want to specialize in helping assemble microbreweries, all that piping
Nice.
and things like
That
that.
sounds really cool.
Maybe on the side we'll do. A little
I'm
bit.
in.
Tina, any thoughts on that? On the, what kind of world and education that you want your own kids to have?
I'm one of those people who, I went to college, I got my 4-year degree, I firmly believe in it, and so, I didn't get a choice. I was just told, you're going to college. There was no discussion about it. I think I'm raising my kids kind of the same way, and doing some prepaid college, now, so hopefully it won't be a huge cost. But, I want my kids to follow their dreams, and as long as those dreams can help them support their lives and their families, then I'm all for it, whether it be, a 4-year college, vocational, whatever it is.
All right, quick survey of the table here. Tina, majors?
Communications.
Journalism.
Journalism? All right, I was history. and then had to go get I was actually going to go to law school, but then
Oh, I'm so sorry I called you out.
and then I went to graduate school and worked as a night custodian to put myself through journalism school. So anything is a dream compared to working as a night custodian. Not that we don't need those, by the way. We have
right.
lots of those at BPS. So let's move on to a topic that is in the news all the time, and that is the topic of fake news. What that means has changed, and you hear about it all the time. It's kind of concerning to me that there are people who've just decided that everything's fake news and they're going to check out of certain sources. But what does that mean to you when you hear not only what does fake news mean, but what does it mean to you when you hear somebody say that? Isadora?
I don't know what that actually means. I think everyone has their own interpretation. Well, you do have actual fake news, which especially during the elections, and it's been happening throughout the world. In Ukraine, during their presidential elections as well, you had these fake websites spreading news about
They're
certain
clickbait. They get
Yeah.
paid for the ads if they
Right.
put out some sort of viral.
And that is actual fake. But then you have this other side, which has been pushed by our president as well, that everything that the mainstream media reports is considered fake. But at the same time, you see the New York Times, the Washington Post, they're still getting a lot of audience, and they're the main targets of this whole fake news conspiracy, for the lack of a better word. So it's funny, people say they don't trust us. They still come to us for information, hopefully. But I think it's become sort of a public relations crisis for us, where we constantly have to explain what we do and explain that we did not go into this profession with a particular agenda. We went into it because we're dreamers, and we want to tell the stories of people and the news, and you're constantly having to explain yourself. But it keeps it more challenging. It's just like with any other industry.
Tina, Florida Today has and the rest of the news media have a public relations crisis. You're a public relations professional.
You looking for
You
your
are
clients?
chief
Yeah.
strategist at Strategic Inc. here in Brevard County. What any thoughts on what could make things better? Are we seeing this kind of stuff and hearing it at the local level too?
I think so, and I think the key is transparency. Our goal as PR people when we work for a corporation is to try to get them to be as transparent as possible so that the news that you guys report is more accurate and factual. What I recall from being in the corporate world is there was a lot of pushing down of that ideology, and to say, we don't feel safe talking about that, so, the lawyers internally might say, just say no comment, don't respond, don't give the media the information that they need because we might look bad.
Right.
Well, that really does damage to everyone, because then you've got this fake news proliferation. You've got to report on something. And if we're not doing our job and letting you have that information, the factual information, something's going out there, whether it came from us or not.
Yeah.
So I just think it's really important and incumbent upon the companies themselves to work with the news media openly and be as transparent as possible, and that's going to result in more accurate reporting.
Yeah, and a couple of side notes. Right after the presidential election, the Washington Post, which is constantly under target by the Trump administration, actually hired 50 reporters, I think. So is it affecting our revenue? I think we have bigger issues than fake news that are affecting our industry, and that's just something, unfortunately, no PR campaign is going to fix, which is the rise of the internet, and our revenues are decreasing in print, and that has nothing to do with fake news.
I'll point out that from my perspective, having been in media management in the Gannett Company and other companies, including the New York Times Company and Cox for many years, people aren't quitting their local media. They're just going to 10 other places at the same time, and it's that fracturing of the media that makes each one of them a little bit less profitable. Do you think that the biggest risk is not necessarily the fake news, but just the absence of some coverage of things that are really, really important to us?
Yeah, I think as media companies continue to shrink, and that's a national trend, yeah, you're going to have less coverage. And the fracturing issue is, I think, from a revenue point of view, is also a big one. Like, if you don't like what Florida Today has to say, maybe you go to Brevard News or another news outlet. So, but I think that's an inevitable trend that we're constantly going to have to fight. But I'm an optimist. I think since last year's election, I think many media companies have become very laser focused on watchdog journalism, and I think that's great. But yeah, those financial pressures will be there. It's a much more competitive market.
Tina, we've got 30 seconds left. What do you tell your youngsters about how to judge the real from the fake?
I think that we all have attention deficit disorder now because there's so much technology coming at us, and that's why, where we get our news is fractured. So I think it's important for them to do their due diligence on whatever the topic happens to be, do some reading, imagine that, and just become educated before they make decisions. I think that's really important.
Tina Lange, Isadora Rangel, thank you so much for
Thank
joining
you.
us here today. Well, that's our program. Special thanks to our producer, editor, and drone pilot, Mike Francisco of BPS TV. Our digital and social media specialist is Rachel Horst. Brevard Watch is a project of the Department of Government and Community Relations at Brevard Public Schools, made possible by the generous support of Community Credit Union. I'm Matt Reed. We'll see you next time on Spectrum Channel 496 on YouTube or in your news feed on Facebook and Twitter.